In the news tonight, His Majesty the King writes about Jordan's pluralism and national unity as the backbone of the kingdom's security and stability in an article published by the US-based World Policy Journal. Syria hands over information about its chemical arsenal to the UN-backed weapons watchdog, meeting the first deadline of a disarmament operation that averted the threat of Western airstrikes. And the German Chancellor wraps up her re-election campaign with an appeal to defend Europe and her centre-right coalition against Eurosceptics, saying it will be a tight race. Good evening and welcome to a new edition of the news. Here are the details. World Policy Journal stated in the editor's note preceding an article written by His Majesty the King and published just before his U.S. visit to lead Jordan's delegation to the 68th Security Council session that despite regional turmoil, the Kingdom of Jordan remains a model of security and stability. The editor credits His Majesty the King for continued economic progress in Jordan and for his leading role in peacemaking between Palestinians and Israelis. His Majesty begins his article titled Pluralism and National Unity, the Backbone of Jordan's Security, by explaining why Jordan is a secure and stable country. He writes that not the power nor the natural resources are behind Jordan's security, but rather the deeply rooted values of its people that have fortified the kingdom during decades of changes and challenges. And today, those values of unity, moderation, pluralism, and respect, the King continues, have helped achieve a conciliatory democratic reform that surpasses exceptional regional and international challenges. His Majesty also talks about the mosaic of Jordan's society and how all people from various origins and religions coexist in mutual respect. The King reviews challenges facing Jordan, one of which being a young population with high expectations, and states that political and economic reform are the only way forward so as to provide equal opportunities for all to participate in development and partake in success. His Majesty also reviews constitutional changes and legislative reforms undertaken to enhance democracy, leading to parliamentary blocs and an elected government, asserting his keen determination to effect political transformation. However, His Majesty writes that Jordan needs the support of the international community to fulfill its aspirations for economic and political transformation, urging economic support to Jordan, a country with limited resources, support in dealing with the Syrian refugee crisis and finding a political solution to end the war in Syria, and support in ending the Palestinian-Israeli conflict on the basis of a two-state solution. The third meeting to discuss progress of national projects funded by a $5 billion Arab Gulf grant convened at the Prime Ministry today. Prime Minister Abdullah Mansour chaired the meeting, attended by representatives of 17 ministries and 8 independent entities benefiting from the allocations. He began by renewing the government's gratitude to Arab heads of state who embarked the funds in support of Jordan's developmental projects jointly agreed in the terms of the grant. And so said failure to spend the grant money and in due time is to be considered a crime against the country. The Prime Minister listened to a briefing by the respective ministers on 114 projects that will be implemented under the grant. Separately, the Prime Minister visited the Ministry of Information and Communications Technology to check on projects underway, namely the Smart Card and fiber optics projects. The National Smart Card, in the making, will include citizens' personal data and will enable them to access public services such as medical insurance and driver's license. The fiber optics project, once tender documents are completed and approved by the Council of Ministers, will be implemented under the Arab Gulf grant. The project will serve to computerize the health sector, upgrade the education sector, and link the various state institutions. Over to Syria, which today disclosed information on its chemical weapons program to the Organization of the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, OPCW, meeting the first deadline of a disarmament operation that averted the threat of Western airstrikes. The OPCW said it received the expected disclosure from Damascus 24 hours after saying it was given a partial document from Syrian authorities and is reviewing the information. OPCW's core members are due to vote by next week on a plan aimed at fast-tracking the destruction of Syria's stockpiles of chemical arms by mid-next year. Syria has agreed to destroy its chemical weapons under a joint Russian-U.S. proposal designed to avert a U.S. military strike on Syria. The OPCW, located in The Hague in the Netherlands, is a long-term partner of the United Nations, controlling and eliminating chemical weapons. It was founded in 1997 and has covered 98% of the world's population and land, as well as the same percentage of chemical industries around the world. It has entered the spotlight after it analyzed samples of chemical weapons in Syria last month, bringing the number of its member states to 190. The OPCW's enormous work of assisting the UN cannot be done at their own laboratory. In fact, the main task of the lab is to control the analysis results from 21 cooperating labs along with field samplings.
And this actually gives a fingerprint of the chemical, and then you can search in databases. And the sensitivity of this instrument is that you can easily find chemicals that are at concentrations of 1 parts per million.
Meanwhile, the United Nations resolution on Syria is still under discussion after Damascus submitted initial chemical weapons inventory to OPCW. Spokesman for the UN Secretary General Martin Nizerki said the UN is still negotiating and discussing the issue of Syria's chemical weapons and that specialists of the OPCW are reviewing the inventory. The OPCW announced its scheduled Executive Council meeting tomorrow has been postponed, but Nizerki said Secretary General Ban Ki-moon was in close contact with the Director General of OPCW.
Obviously, as the Secretary General has said, we don't have time to lose on this matter, and therefore I'm sure that, that this will take place before too long, so that the rest of the pieces can fall into place sooner rather than later. The OPCW...
On the ground, and after 2 days of rebel attacks on military checkpoints in the northwest of the city of Hama, government forces shelled rebel positions in the area, killing 15 people, including some civilian casualties. Elsewhere, rebels are reported to have seized several villages south of Aleppo as part of their efforts to cut Syria's biggest city off from government forces and stop supplies and reinforcements from Damascus. In Iraq, more than 65 people were killed in a triple bombing that targeted a tent of mourners in Sadr city. Police said a car bomb went off near the tent where a funeral was being held, and a while later a suicide bomber driving a car blew himself up. And a third explosion followed as police, ambulances and firefighters were gathering at the scene. At least 100 others were wounded in the attack. Earlier in the day, 4 suicide bombers stormed the police headquarters in the town of Baji, north of Baghdad, at dawn, killing 6 SWAT officers after a 1-hour shootout. Iraqi security sources said the bombers shot dead the guards outside the compound. One of them was killed in the ensuing fighting inside the base, and the other 3 blew themselves up when army reinforcements arrived. It was not clear who was behind the attack. Iraqi Kurds voted for a new parliament as Kurdistan region seeks greater autonomy from Baghdad. The election comes after a month of campaigning, during which at least 2 people were killed by stray bullets. The political arena is dominated by 2 parties, the Kurdistan Democratic Party and the Patriotic Union of Kurdistan. The 2 ruling parties are widely expected to preserve their majority in parliament and continue their alliance, meaning there will likely be no major shifts in policy. And German Chancellor Angela Merkel, an avid sports fan, attended a basketball game in Stralsund shortly after she ended her final rally in the Baltic Sea city ahead of federal elections tomorrow. The friendly took place between Rostock Seawolves and Alba Berlin. Merkel wrapped up her re-election campaign with an appeal to defend Europe and her center-right coalition against Eurosceptics. According to opinion polls, a third of 62 million voters were still undecided just days before the polls, leaving Merkel at risk of spending her third term in a right-left coalition. When asked what she would do tomorrow, Merkel laughingly said she would cast her one vote, acknowledging it would be a tight race. If she wins, Merkel will be the third post-war chancellor to win a third term. The other two were Konrad Adenauer, who oversaw post-war reconstruction, and Helmut Kohl, who led the country through unification. Kenyan security forces have arrested one of the gunmen who attacked a shopping mall in the capital, Nairobi, killing some 25 people, including children, and sending scores fleeing in panic. At least 24 were injured, among them American citizens, according to a State Department statement. Shooting continued hours after the initial assault, as troops surrounded the Westgate Mall and police and soldiers combed the building. The Al-Qaeda-linked Somali militant group Al-Shabaab claimed responsibility for the attack, saying Kenya had received repeated warnings to pull its troops out of Somalia or face severe consequences. And the China Fly-In 2013 continued today with a formation flying performance at the Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association in the northeastern province of Liaoning. Famous Lithuanian aerobatic pilot Jurgis Kairis performed the three-plane Yak 52, Yak 50 and Juka formation special routine with his Air Bandits team. The three planes beat up the sky, sometimes playing together and sometimes seemingly doing their own thing in a dynamically choreographed display of precision. The 60-year-old pilot has won many awards for his flying and has invented several maneuvers, such as the Kairos wheel and the Cobra. The three-day China Fly-In 2013, concluding tomorrow, has attracted aerobatic teams from over 20 countries. Over to Milan Fashion Week, where Italian husband and wife design duo Piero and Miriam Civindi unveiled their spring-summer collection entitled Clean and Soft Decoration. Models wore tailored jackets, city shorts and shift dresses, clothes that can be worn during summer in the city. Muted color palettes were used for the ready-to-wear collection, with black, sand, red and white colored garments. And Italian designer Roberto Cavalli unveiled his 2014 spring-summer collection made for a lady who is romantic and intelligent. This season's collection drew inspiration from the silver screen, with Cavalli saying the show takes place on his own film set. Models were illuminated with bright cinematic-style spotlights as they sashayed down the catwalk. Cavalli's look for next year uses hues of pearly gray, pink and light blue, contrasted with darker garments. It also includes short cocktail dresses as well as longer fitted evening gowns and loose flowing silk chiffon kaftans. Python, iguana and crocodile prints are all present in the collection. Roseburg was actually 0.091 seconds behind. And finally, cool and partly cloudy conditions prevail, with northerly moderate to brisk winds and a continued chance for light rain. Tomorrow, similar weather conditions continue with the beginning of the autumn season, with more expected rain showers in the northern and central regions. Winds will be northwesterly moderate to brisk, blowing dust in the desert areas. The Gulf of Aqaba should expect relatively hot weather with northerly moderate winds and calm seas. Now to look at temperatures forecast for tonight and tomorrow. And to close, here's a reminder of the day's top stories. His Majesty the King writes about Jordan's pluralism and national unity as a backbone of the kingdom's security and stability in an article published by the US-based World Policy Journal. Syria hands over information about its chemical arsenal to the UN-backed weapons watchdog, meeting the first deadline of a disarmament operation that averted the threat of Western airstrikes. And the German Chancellor wraps up her re-election campaign with an appeal to defend Europe and her center-right coalition against Eurosceptics, saying it will be a tight race. And with this, we come to the end of this edition of the news. I'm Alia Tuqan. Thank you for joining us and have a good night.